In 2013, according to your story, he only gave $500,000 in public gifts, and then 2014 just $2.25 million, a tiny fraction of his net worth even at the time. So how does this all change, Sophie, with the news last week that Jeff Bezos is stepping down as CEO of Amazon later this year? Does that mean he's going to focus more on philanthropy and we'll start to see more money come from him?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I do want to say that, to be fair to Bezos, you know, a lot of the big name philanthropists that we know of today, including Bill Gates, who's lauded as one of the greatest philanthropists of all time, didn't really start giving until they stepped down from the companies that made them so rich. So with Bezos stepping down, you know, he said in his letter that his philanthropies, the Bezos Earth Fund and the Bezos Family Fund, the Day One Fund, are some of the things that he wants to focus on more. So these are, you know, a combined $12 billion of commitments that he's made to give away his money. So far he hasn't given that much away. So far he's only given about more than $1 billion away. But we could see that change. We could see him giving at a much faster pace. And after he's done with that $12 billion, maybe we could see him giving...
Jeff Bezos has kept many things private until now. For the first time, layers of his personal life are being peeled back, revealing a story far more complex than headlines ever suggested. Behind the wealth, the power, and the billion-dollar empire lies a history shaped by emotional scars, silent decisions, and one woman who knew him better than anyone. What really ended his 25-year marriage? Why did Lauren Sánchez receive a quiet warning, and what hidden truth shaped everything Jeff built? The answers go deeper than scandal. They go straight to the heart of the man himself. Long before the public knew the full story, Lauren Sánchez entered a relationship that would place her at the center of one of the most widely scrutinized love stories of the decade. It didn't begin at a red carpet event or a high-profile party. It began in private, ordinary, quiet, and deeply consequential. MacKenzie Scott, then still known as the wife of Jeff Bezos, was already beginning the process of separating from the man with whom she had built an empire. There were no headlines yet, no scandal. But change was already underway. At the time, Lauren was navigating her own complex situation. A former news anchor and helicopter pilot, she wasn't unfamiliar with the spotlight, but nothing could fully prepare her for what was coming. The world hadn't yet caught wind of her connection to Bezos, but inside their inner circle, shifts were happening. What would later be called an affair by tabloids was, according to Bezos and others close to the situation, the beginning of a relationship that followed the quiet end of a 25-year marriage. Media would later erupt with talk of betrayal and sensational headlines. Bezos, one of the most visible billionaires on earth, was overnight a gossip subject. But this frenzy had a less dramatic truth. MacKenzie and Jeff had drifted apart for a long time. They had raised children together and built one of the most influential companies in the world, but they had done so while each of them slowly evolved in their own directions. He would later say that the divorce was amicable, and that he considered MacKenzie to be incredible, being thankful for the years they shared. He never literally said she gave him permission to go, but his public tone indicated a kind of mutual acceptance. Over a cool breakup shortly before Jeff's relationship with Lauren became public, they released a statement, very brief yet altogether united, announcing their separation. Never has she given an interview regarding the affair, nor has she offered comment on Sanchez, but her silence spoke volumes. She did not fight the narrative. She did not engage in any public commentary. She simply stepped back with quiet dignity and purpose. And for Lauren, that absence may have resonated more than any threat ever could. To love somebody like Jeff Bezos, as many people have observed, also means to understand his intensity. His ambition, restlessness, and thirst for reinvention were measurable at every phase of his career, from founding Amazon in a garage to boisterous rocket launchings through Blue Origin. Those who were close to him have commented about his impossibly demanding standards and leading edge drive. Those psychological attributes made him alter commerce globally equally. They molded the contours of his relationships. MacKenzie had lived in the presence of this energy for more than 2 decades. She was there through the early years of Amazon. She was writing checks, reading business plans, raising a family, and cheering Jeff on as he rolled out his worldview and the life they shared. She knew very well what it meant to love someone with a vision that led him often far into the future. Though she never voiced it publicly, she probably had a greater sense than anyone of just how much that intensity cost. But Lauren had no idea that MacKenzie's words were tied to a secret buried deep in Jeff's past, one even he tried to forget. It started with something ordinary, a quiet moment alone in their Seattle home, filled with the artifacts of years spent building a life together. MacKenzie wasn't searching for Anything specific, she was organizing, sorting, and reflecting, navigating the early emotional terrain of a private separation. From Jeff Bezos, their divorce had not yet been made public, but the process of uncoupling, logistical and emotional, was already underway. Their shared life was complex, woven through with early ambitions, long hours, and the meteoric rise of a company that began in their garage. Amazon had started in Bellevue, Washington in 1994. They had worked side by side in those early days, MacKenzie handling accounting and administrative tasks, Jeff focusing on the business's vision. The company grew quickly, but its foundations were personal. They had staked everything on a bold idea. MacKenzie knew Jeff's story well. She had always known about his childhood and the people who helped shape him. Jeff had been born Jeffrey Preston Jorgensen in 1964 in Albuquerque, New Mexico. His mother, Jackie, was a teenager at the time. His biological father, Ted Jorgensen, had separated from Jackie when Jeff was still a toddler. In 1968, Jackie married Miguel Bezos, a Cuban immigrant who would adopt Jeff and give him his last name. Miguel was now a living presence that was in constant support with love and affection in Jeff's life. He provided Jeff with everything associated with education, his initial interest in science and technology, and his desire to build. Jeff spoke often and of Miguel with deep respect and gratitude. Interviews with him were full of acknowledgments to his parents, who offered him unwavering support that gave birth to great confidence and drive in him. His statements about his biological father, namely Ted Jorgensen, were of a rare kind. Years later, he was located by a journalist. Ted Jorgensen acknowledged he had never known in any capacity what happened to his son. The two never got in touch again. This confusing family history was known to MacKenzie, but Jeff was not one to linger in the past. He was present, focused, always busy, thinking 10 steps ahead. He moved with intensity and concentration in business and life. He thrived on momentum even when it was quiet. He found his mind racing toward innovation, toward solutions, toward the next objective. In contrast, MacKenzie was moving at a different rhythm. Being a writer by training, she placed emphasis on introspection, personal narratives, and the notions of owning your story. To her, past experience was not merely contextual but imbued with meaning. Over the years, she had watched from how Jeff led meetings to how he raised his children, as he seamlessly integrated the pursuit of excellence into everything he did. His astonishing attention to detail, the brutality with which he rejected anything that impeded efficiency, and his unshakable belief in holding high standards. Those things, yes, had contributed toward his success, but they had also become like a suit of armor. She was a constant support throughout the roller coaster journey that was Amazon. When they moved 3,000 miles across the country to start the company, she backed that risk without a moment's hesitation. She celebrated his successes and withstood the rigors of startup life. When he was busy building one of the most important companies in the world, she held the family together and raised the kids most carefully. Ended their marriage. Their divorce agreement of 2019, marked by the huge scale of MacKenzie getting Amazon shares valued at several tens of billions, but also significant in its civility. They issued a joint public statement in which they said a few words about a shared life together, parenting journeys, and emphasized mutual respect and gratitude for each other. MacKenzie was plotting her path in clear and exact terms post-divorce with single-minded purpose. She signed the giving pledge, agreeing to give away most of her wealth for charitable causes. And that's when she made her decision, not just to end the marriage, but to break a generational curse. When the headlines broke in early
to Jeff Bezos from 1993 to 2019, but walked away from her marriage to Bezos, pledging her heart.
That blurred the line between tech mogul and tabloid fixture. News outlets swarmed with stories of secret rendezvous, leaked text messages, and salacious speculation. Lauren Sánchez, a glamorous former news anchor and helicopter pilot, was suddenly thrust into a spotlight. She didn't ask for. The world called her the other woman. But within the walls of Jeff and MacKenzie's home, the truth had already been spoken. The marriage was already over. The affair was not the earthquake, it was the aftershock. What few understood then, and what Bezos would later imply in statements, was that the relationship with Lauren didn't begin in betrayal. It emerged in the aftermath of a marriage that had run its quiet course. He and MacKenzie had reportedly been drifting apart for years. Not in anger, not even in coldness, but in silence. In that quiet place where couples stop asking questions, stop dreaming together, and simply function like co-founders of a shared life. Internal sources state that Bezos actually termed this process a transition, an utterly clinical corporate kind of word. However, it does reflect the change that had already occurred. His connection with Lauren did not tear apart the marriage, it merely folded into the space where that marriage had already given way to failure. No bang, just exhaustion. Rumors further suggested that MacKenzie was aware, well ahead of the tabloids, Not because of a dramatic revelation, she just had her eye on the receding marriage of a husband, sunsetting his fated initiative at Amazon methodically, quietly, and already envisioning the next chapter. Some accounts said she did not respond with confrontation, but with understanding. To outsiders it might look like grace, but to insiders, it is merely acceptance. Bezos would later refer to that incident as a gift, as if MacKenzie had called it a clever way of putting off their divorce. Disapproval clearly was not released, since the two had been married since 1993, having built their family and empire, even if they both reared and found themselves far apart. At that time, he sought space and legacy. She sought impact and simplicity. The separation was in many aspects impersonal, but pedestrian. The world unfortunately saw it all differently. The bombshell report from the National Enquirer purported to have months of surveillance with intimate photos and private messages for evidence. This threw the internet into a frenzy. People were not just shocked, they were angry. The dramatic story fed by a very familiar accusation: Jeff abandoned his devoted wife for somebody younger and much better looking. Swift and merciless was the backlash. The divorce announcement revealed a nuance within the truth. Jeff and MacKenzie had already agreed to go their separate ways before the media found out. They called themselves long separated. The relationship with Lauren had not been a clandestine affair. Behind MacKenzie's back, it was the start of a new chapter after the old had been laid to rest. In silence, it wasn't easy, it wasn't painless, but it was true. As for Lauren Sánchez, she was no homewrecker. She had not engineered a land grab. For Jeff's heart, her own marriage was crumbling, and her burgeoning romance with Bezos apparently started from a friendship based on common interests, serious conversation, and mutual curiosity. That friendship turned intimate, and the stories go, they were neither reckless nor discreet about it. They were careful in a way that suggested the two of them knew fully what they were getting themselves into, yet the world never got to see what MacKenzie sacrificed to make it happen. Until her next move shocked everyone when the dust settled from one of the most expensive divorces in modern history. MacKenzie Scott stood at the center of a storm and chose stillness while the media obsessed over Jeff Bezos' next move and Lauren Sanchez's presence at his side. MacKenzie was already making quiet, deliberate decisions. She didn't seek interviews, she didn't give emotional tell-alls. Instead, she signed the divorce settlement and disappeared, only to re-emerge as a philanthropic force unlike anything the billionaire world had ever seen. Under the terms of their separation, MacKenzie received nearly $36 billion in Amazon stock, instantly making her one of the richest women on the planet. And in a move that shocked even those who thought they knew her, she pledged to give most of it away. No flashy yachts, no sudden investments in fashion houses or media conglomerates. She signed the Giving Pledge, a campaign started by Bill and Melinda Gates and Warren Buffett, vowing to donate the majority of her wealth to charitable causes. But this was not merely about generosity, there was strategy involved. MacKenzie did not just give money away, she put a new internal spin on how money is given by outpacing legacy foundations and removing cumbersome red tape from her operations. She channeled resources toward causes that were often neglected: racial equity, women's rights, food insecurity, education, and climate change. In a world where philanthropy felt slow and performative, MacKenzie made it immediate and impactful. Her team performed the silent vetting of organizations and wired millions, sometimes hundreds of millions, without naming rights and building dedications. One food bank director called the moment they received MacKenzie's donation like a miracle. There was no prior conversation, no media announcement, just an email saying the funds were transferred and wishing really well for the work to continue. With a span of only 2 years, MacKenzie came across to donate nearly $14 billion to over 1,600 organizations. Most of them were having local grassroots initiatives, small teams doing big things in underserved communities. She defined billion-dollar philanthropy not as legacy building, but redistribution of wealth. She wanted to level the playing field, but not in helping all this while the world was still processing her divorce. Many expected her to be ruined or worse, bitter. Instead, dignity and focus found with a whole new mission. Where Jeff leaned into expansion, space, innovation, reinvention, MacKenzie leaned into reduction, pared down, stripped back, focused on people instead of platforms, service instead of legacy. They were strikingly contrasted. Jeff was doing amazing new things, a dozen rockets or so, reinventing himself on stages where once only the public would have had access. MacKenzie, the quiet rewriting of philanthropy's future. No interviews for the public, rare appearances, and no comment made on the details of her personal life, but her actions spoke louder than any expose could. For in that silence, she has come by something rare in the modern age of relentlessly exposed media authenticity. She was not out there for making headlines, but earning trust. Her work has alarmed billionaire circles because it leads many of the wealthy philanthropists to rethink their entire charitable giving. strategies. Suddenly nonprofits that might have been turned down for funding from classic foundations found themselves getting rescued by the billionaires. MacKenzie is not interested in sitting on boards or trying to formulate strategies from afar. She assumes that those doing the work know how to spend the money. Meanwhile, Jeff was undergoing his own transformation, and it would soon reach a level no one expected. After the divorce, Jeff Bezos didn't retreat. He evolved what the world saw as a personal scandal. He used as a catalyst for transformation. It wasn't just a breakup, it was a turning point. With the weight of a 25-year marriage behind him and the spotlight burning brighter than ever, Bezos began to reinvent himself piece by piece. And it started with a bold decision that caught Wall Street, Silicon Valley, and even his closest advisors by surprise. He stepped down as CEO of Amazon. In July 2021, Bezos passed the reins of Amazon to Andy Jassy, the former head of Amazon Web Services. The announcement shook the business world. After all, Amazon wasn't just a company, it was his company, born in a garage, scaled into a global empire. For decades, Bezos had been the architect of its explosive growth, the face of its culture, and the visionary behind every pivot. But now he was walking away from day-to-day control. Publicly, he announced it as a transition toward new passions. He wanted to regard his work at Blue Origin, his climate change endeavors, and his pursuits, but underneath the polished press releases lay the more concrete truth. This was a man attempting to reposition his identity, not just as a CEO or a billionaire, but something more meaningful, more human. His new fixation became Blue Origin. For years, it was more of an afterthought, a sideline dream. But now he devoted himself to it with the kind of relentless focus that once built Amazon. He took a much-publicized flight into space on the New Shepard rocket in 2021, calling it the best day ever. For some, it was a spectacle of vanity. For others, it was freeing in that Bezos reached for something other than Earth. The very idea of it, but those around him sensed something more profound. It was not merely about pushing the boundaries, it was about establishing a legacy. Jeff Bezos had given essentially all of his adult life to build a company that had transformed how the world shops, communicates, and works. He now wanted to influence how it dreams. The universe is not merely a frontier, it is a blank canvas. Additionally, the relationship he held with Lauren Sánchez was starting to transform. She was a major part of the transformation he had toward the public and private self. It wasn't just a romantic partner, but a fellow collaborator, an aviation enthusiast and media veteran. Becoming privy to all the stresses that accompany media attention, they went to high-power soirees like benefits, galas for charity, and climate summits as a couple for the first time in several decades. It appeared that Bezos was actually relishing the attention, if that's what you'd call it. He was much closer to tolerating it. Restructuring would not only be external changes during that period, also indicate a certain kind of behavior that people who went by him noticed. He appeared open, more relaxed, even philosophically inclined. In fact, interviews showed a softer side, reflections on love, regret, and purpose, among many other things. He even went as far as saying watching someone you love pursue their adventure is the greatest gift. Quite poetic, but in many ways it said something else. A man trying to make peace with himself, knowing that not everything can be controlled or optimized. Because the further Jeff ran toward the future, the closer he got to confronting the past he buried for decades. Before he was Jeff Bezos, the titan of e-commerce, the space entrepreneur, the richest man on earth, he was Jeffrey Preston Jorgensen, a boy born in Albuquerque, New Mexico, to a teenage mother and a father who would vanish from his life almost immediately. His mother, Jackie, was just 17 when she had him. His biological father, Ted Jorgensen, was a bike shop owner with a circus background, struggling to balance youth with responsibility. The marriage didn't last. Within a year, Ted was gone, and Jeff would never see him again. When Jeff was for Jackie married Miguel Mike Bezos, a Cuban immigrant who had come to the US alone. At the age of 15, Mike legally adopted Jeff and gave him the last name that would eventually become world famous. He was stable, hardworking, and present everything Ted hadn't been. Jeff would later speak about Mike with deep admiration, calling him one of the most influential people in his life. But the truth is, the absence of his biological father left a wound that never fully closed. Jeff spoke out rarely on Ted until long in life, and then only with the measured distance of one who has spent a lifetime trying to erase a memory. Forgetting does not equal healing. It is said that in A Diary of Mine, MacKenzie Scott found a letter allocating responsibility to the absentee man. The language was primal, vociferous with rage, confusion, and sorrow. This was not written by the billionaire that Jeff had become, it was from the boy he had never stopped being. Reportedly in the letter, Jeff spoke of the defining hurt of growing up with the knowledge that someone had consciously chosen to walk away from you. He described long hours staring out the window, wishing Ted would just come back. He wrote about deciding to build something so massive, so undeniable, It would forever haunt the man who abandoned him. It was not some dream he allegedly conceded. It was an act of retribution, a form of silent revenge. The anguish wasn't only emotional. As the tale went on, it became appendicular as well, obsession with control and long-term planning, workaholic habits. None of those were merely professional. It was survival strategies. After all, it was not so much a desire to achieve, but an assurance that he would never be forgotten. No one would ever toss him away or leave him behind. That though came at a price as powerful as the drive was. After some reading of the letter, MacKenzie had figured that out for years. She could be counted as one of Jeff's supporters, unaware of what the engine was behind his ambition. Not anymore, since now she knew it was not innovation or even disruption driving him. For it was abandonment, the desperate desire to matter to someone who had stopped looking. And when she saw that, she now knew what was truly at stake, not just for Jeff but for their children as well. Cycles remain unbroken until their nature is identified. MacKenzie supposedly feared her children would spend their lives in search of some validation they would never find. They might model themselves after a father still haunted by the boy he once was, that they would confuse achievement with worth, that they would inherit not just Jeff's brilliance, his ache. It was said, according to some, that her leaving was not related to infidelity. It was to protect, to stop a cycle before it could pass on to the next generation. She didn't want out of this marriage. She wanted the mind freed up for the children and for Jeff. Even if he couldn't see it yet, but only when Lauren learned the full story did she begin to see the true weight of the man she married. Legacy and the curse broken. When MacKenzie Scott walked away from Jeff Bezos, the world called it a clean, dignified divorce, but behind that graceful exit was a decision shaped not just by circumstance but, according to rumors, by deep foresight. She wasn't just leaving a marriage, she was breaking a pattern, one that began long before her, one that Jeff himself hadn't fully acknowledged. The cycle of absence, emotional distance, and validation seeking that shaped him from childhood wasn't going to shape their children, not if she could help it. MacKenzie had learned not only what fueled Jeff but what could destroy him. She saw the immense power of his ambition, but also the fragility beneath it. And when she looked at their children, she saw the potential for brilliance but also the risk of inheritance, not of wealth, but of wound. In her silence, in her calm exit, in her sudden shift toward massive giving, there was more than strategy. There was a mother trying to reroute destiny. She had married a man driven by something invisible and corrosive, and she had loved him truly and long enough to see that if she didn't stop the cycle, it would perpetuate endlessly. It was not just a divorce, it was a detour, and that is perhaps the most misunderstood part of the entire story. Lauren Sánchez now found herself stepping into a life that came not just with power and money, but with a legacy still haunted by the past. She had come from the world of media and helicopters. She knew how to fly in all senses, but this was new terrain. Marrying a man who had spent decades building a life from absence meant that every part of their relationship would carry invisible weight. It was not about age or status, it was about resonance. Could she hold the complexity that came with Jeff Bezos, not just the billionaire but the boy who wrote letters of rage and grief? Could she share a life with someone who had only ever moved forward, never backward, who had treated reflection like friction? Yet in their relationship, Lauren became not just a lover, but a witness. She saw him differently than the world did. She saw the tenderness, the insecurity, the constant need to build, to create, to prove something unprovable. People often mistook her for just another glamorous figure on his arm, but behind the scenes, she was navigating a very real, emotionally charged reality. Being with Jeff meant being with the future, but also the past. It meant understanding that silence often covered scars, that intensity often masked fragility. She became part of his redefinition, not by replacing MacKenzie, but by entering a different chapter, one that Jeff himself hadn't fully written yet. She had to learn what MacKenzie already knew, that love with Jeff was not light, it was not ease, it was orbiting a planet that pulled everything inward with force. The warning that MacKenzie gave Lauren was not with words, but with presence, or rather with absence. Her refusal to engage publicly, her decision to exit gracefully, her sudden pivot toward giving it all away, these were not reactions. They were signals. Lauren would have to decode them and decide what kind of life she was stepping into, because the truth was Jeff Bezos was still in the middle of becoming. He had left Amazon, he had flown into space, he had gone public with his relationship, but inside the man was still unraveling, still shedding old skin, still trying to outpace the ache that began with a father who disappeared and a boy who promised never to be invisible again. His billions were not armor, they were the product of an ache that could not be fully expressed. And as Lauren stood beside him at events, smiling for cameras, dressed in elegance with jet trails and stars behind them, she was also inheriting a part of that story. She was taking on the aftermath, not of divorce but of emotional excavation. She was marrying a man mid-reinvention, not because he had it all figured out, but because he was finally beginning to ask the right questions: what matters, who matters, and how does a man who's been running all his life finally stop and just be still? Behind the tabloids, behind the memes, behind the yacht trips and gala photos was a story about legacy, about pain, and about the generational shift that happens when someone decides enough. Lauren was not the villain the headlines made her out to be, nor was she a savior. She was something else entirely: a woman who walked into fire knowing full well that love with a man like Jeff Bezos would require more than affection. It would require understanding, patience, and perhaps most importantly, the ability to see the child inside the Titan, to hold his hand even when the cameras stopped flashing, and remind him that he was already seen, already chosen, already loved, not for what he built, but for who he became. In the end, it was never just about a love story or a divorce, or even the richest man in the world finding someone new. It was about legacy, about healing, about the invisible threads that run through every choice we make. Jeff Bezos built an empire, but it was MacKenzie Scott who quietly dismantled a curse. And it was Lauren Sánchez who chose to step into the weight of that history, understanding that real love is not measured in headlines, but in how well we carry each other through the shadows. The past may shape us, but it does not have to define us. And sometimes the greatest reinvention is not found in rockets or revenue, but in learning to live unafraid of being seen exactly as we are. This video covers legal allegations in a news context. All claims are from official filings and no guilt is implied until proven in court. Please keep all discussions respectful. Allegations are not facts until proven in court.